Hey, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of the Solving Problems podcast, where we help you use story to reach more people and grow your church. I'm your host, Jonathan Carone, and I'm joined in our intro segment by our co-host, Kyler Nixon. Kyler, today we're going to be talking about next steps, and it seems like a really basic topic, but it's something that I think we struggle with in the church pretty badly sometimes.
I love this episode too, because not only are we going to be talking about, well, not me and you, but you and Drew, it's a great conversation, talking about next steps and getting people through that journey. But also we're going to be talking about kind of what you and I call half steps, like what's next if they're not quite ready to commit to coming to that event or attending a discipleship class. And Drew has some really super practical ways to do that. So I'm excited about this episode. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, we talk about this with Drew Powell from Crosspoint Church about how a lot of times in church, our next steps, when we do give them, are very much, will you marry me next steps. They're heavy. It's give your life to Jesus, or commit to baptism, or go to someone's house and join a small group. And there are these big commitments, and how some people aren't ready for that yet, but maybe we just need to give people a, will you go on another date with me type of next step. So we get into that.
I think we talked about this last season a little bit, but there's a pastor here in Phoenix that has a great analogy for that. So many times in the church, we invite people over, to our home or whatever, but we're giving them too much bedroom time, and we need to give them more living room time. So Drew's going to cover that a little bit today.
That's such a great analogy. To just clearly present to you what the problem we're talking about today is, it's that no matter how compelling our message is, people aren't going to do anything unless we tell them what we want them to do.
Right.
And many times we forget to tell them what to do. We tell them to do something that is overwhelming or intimidating, and we don't give them a clear path to how we need them to respond to what we're talking about. So today, we're going to be talking about why calling people to action is important. We're going to be talking about how pushy we should be in that call to action. And then we're going to talk a little bit, like Kyler was just saying, how we can give some half steps, some baby steps, so that people who aren't ready to fully commit can still come alongside of us in the journey following Jesus. Our guest today is Drew Powell from Crosspoint Church. Drew is a former lead pastor. He's currently the creative arts pastor at Crosspoint. Drew is on the teaching team at Crosspoint, so he preaches a few times a year. So we get that perspective of also not just church communications, but on stage preaching and teaching, and how to use the call to action in a sermon. And there's some stuff we got into it that we didn't plan on it, but there's about 5 minutes or so about how Crosspoint does some of their branding to really help people know what the next step and most important thing of that weekend service is. So with that being said, we're going to bring back the dance music, and then Drew's going to be with us on the other side for today's interview. All right, Drew's with us now. Drew, go ahead and say hey, everybody.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming back. I want to start our conversation today with a story, because I think it illustrates what we're talking about really well. 3 years before my wife and I started dating, we went on a date. Everything went well and we had a good time, but I was at school in a different town, and dating long distance would have been inconvenient. So I never called her back. This is the point in the story where I'm required legally to tell you I was a jerk and didn't call.
We were all thinking it, so I'm glad you just said it out loud. It's great.
Me and her just have an agreement that I have to add that in anytime I tell the story. But in my defense, she never straight up told me she wanted to go on a second date. So I never called her back. I never asked for it. It would have been inconvenient. And I probably would have enjoyed a second date, which is probably obvious at this point because we got married. But because of the inconvenience and because I wasn't sure of the answer, I never actually took the action to ask for the second date. And to wrap that story around to what we're talking about today, I think this is what churchgoers feel like when they hear a sermon or an announcement and there's no clear-cut next step. Yeah. The sermon made them feel something, just like the date did with me and my now wife. Right. Or the announcement was somewhat interesting, but because it was slightly inconvenient to find out more information, or because they weren't sure what to do next, they just bailed on the entire situation and didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So that's my explanation for why I think calling people to action is important. What's your reasoning for that?
Yeah, I think they're very similar. When I'm preaching or if I'm giving an announcement, I just try to think through the filter of, okay, what am I asking them to do? Or if I'm sitting there, what do you want me to do with this information? And it's so funny how it seems so easy, so clear to have a call to action, and how many times we miss it. I mean, how many times we work so hard to relay the information or even tell a great story, and we just don't give a clear on ramp for people. So I think by definition, that's it. It is literally answering the question, what is my next step? What would you like me to do with this information? And then working really hard to make sure that next step is the clearest, but also the most convenient. Because a lot of us are in a church environment, we're talking to people sitting in seats. And so it's something they're going to have to maybe remember to do later, or if we can somehow figure out a way to engage them in that moment. If there's a step in that moment, your chances are going to go down of them forgetting to do it. So that's part of our challenge.
And I think it goes back to if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably heard the Andy Stanley mantra of doing things for information versus doing things for transformation. And if we're doing things for information, then next steps really don't matter. A call to action doesn't matter because we're just giving someone information and letting them do with what they want. But if we're really trying to do things for transformation where people's lives are transformed, then we have to give them something to do next.
That's true. It's true. I totally agree. And I think it can change based on whether you're preaching or giving the announcements. And I think there's messages where there is a very specific application. I want them to, on Monday morning when they wake up, I want them to do this. But sometimes the call to action in a message is for them to think differently or to dream or to just to be inspired. And there's not a real practical thing I want them to do with that. And I think that's okay for preaching. I think specifically for announcements, I'm not so sure if we'll talk about all this today or not, but I think announcements normally are reserved for there is something I need you to know and I need you to kind of take a step with. So our announcements are very, we try to declutter the stage as much as possible with announcements. There's usually only one, maybe two initiatives that we're taking on at one time. So outside of our stage host welcoming people, just making them feel at home, really we have one or two announcements, and those are the times where the call to action has to be really clear. There's very little things in our announcement block that we'll talk about that's just for inspiration.
Yeah, I think just to circle back a little bit to your comment about preaching, that the action sometimes is just think differently, dream differently, or something like that. I think that is a pretty radical call to action as well because it's different. It changes people. So just because you're giving a message that may not have a clear "go sign up for this" at the end of it, like we still need to not assume that people know we want them to think differently.
Yeah, and there's still ways to get creative. Like we'll do lock screens that they can download, or we'll do something tangible that even if I don't want them to do anything, if I am inviting them into a different way of thinking, there's something that will trigger that during the week on Monday. And of course, our socials, most people's will reflect some of that stuff too. So there'll be reminders throughout the week. But even with that, even if it's not a clear, I want you to go do this thing, we're going to go serve together or whatever it is. If it's just inspiration, we still try to get creative with ways of making sure that stays towards the top of people's mind throughout the week.
My church back in January did a 21 days of prayer and fasting. And I mean, in youth ministry, we always did hey, take this thing, put it somewhere, and every time you see it, pray about this, whatever. So it's a mantra that is done a lot. But my church switched it up and they gave us a lifesaver and told us to put it somewhere. And every time we saw it, pray for someone who we know needed Jesus and that we knew could meet Jesus within the 21 days of prayer and fasting. And it was just a clever thing that I remember every time I saw that lifesaver, it was like, oh, I need to pray. But it was a tangible way to remind me of that call to action to do something different.
We try to do things like that whenever we can, but I keep stealing ideas from you on these podcasts, man. Keep them coming. I'm writing all this stuff down.
I'm all for it because then I can use you guys as proof that this stuff works. So take whatever you need and just let me know that it works.
Will do.
But actually, just a quick plug. This summer, we're going to be doing an entire season on how people have implemented StoryBrand and the success they've seen. And this season and last season has been very theoretical of here's what you can do, here's what could work. But we're going to sit down with some people who have actually been in the weeds and have done this stuff and talk to them how they've done it. So
That'd be great.
I'll be real interested to talk to you guys about how some of this stuff has impacted you. And that leads right into my next question. You've mentioned announcements at Crosspoint and how you guys pull things back and strip it down. But how pushy are you with calling people to that next step? Is the call to action more passive, or do you just hit people in the face with it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I wouldn't say we're pushy, and I don't think you have to be pushy if you're clear. I think if you're feeling yourself being pushy, I would imagine that you haven't yet done a great job setting up the rest of the brand script before then. Because I feel like if you do a great job exposing the problem, the external, internal, philosophical problems someone may have, say you're promoting an event, whatever it is, if you've identified the character and the problem well, and you've kind of walked them through authority and empathy, and we get it, we understand it's a whatever. By then, when you get to the call to action, it just has to be really clear. And you know, at that point, they should be sitting on the edge of the seats, like, "Hey, tell me where to buy. Like, where's the buy now button? I want this. I need this." So I would say, just in my own metrics, like if I feel myself on stage feeling like I'm having to get pushy, I probably haven't done the due diligence of setting up the tension well and really exposing the problem well. Because by the time I get the call to action, it just needs to be the buy now button. And so, long answer to your question is no. I don't see the need to have to be pushy. I think you can be passionate. You know, I think you can be passionate about how to get involved or how to whatever the call to action is in that moment. But again, I think if you're being pushy, you probably need to go back to the brand script and help unpack the problem a little bit more.
That's a really good answer, actually. But it leads me again to my next one. You're just setting me up like crazy here. The average person needs to see, hear, touch a message 7 times before they do whatever the action is that you're asking for them. So how do we balance getting those touch points and letting them know that they're clear what we want them to do without being super annoying or without being super pushy?
The way we do it is we try to expose them to whatever it is that we're asking them to do. Again, we simplify a lot of what we do at Crosspoint, so we don't have tons of things going on. So it gives us the ability to really kind of streamline our push. And so I'll just use, let's just use groups for an example. We try to use a lot of different environments throughout the whole experience, say on a Sunday morning, that will always nod towards the groups. And so it's not just hearing it in the auditorium. When they pull in the parking lot, they're going to probably see some signage. And for us, we color code all of our main areas of ministry. So for groups, anytime you see anything in groups, it's green. We choose green because it just symbolizes flourishing and life-giving and growth. And we feel like that happens in groups. And so our groups are branded all in green. So if you pull in the parking lot on a groups push day, in the parking lot, you're going to see signage. It's going to have the group's logo. It's going to have green. You're going to see volunteers with green shirts on. You're going to see green balloons. You're going to see a group's tent that's green. You're going to walk into the lobby. You're going to see a destination that's really well set up with green balloons, a green signage again, all that stuff. So even before you even got the auditorium, we've already had several different touch points. So now you walk in the auditorium, your host, your campus pastor, whoever is going to, they're going to talk about groups. That's where they'll get the more extended brand script. That's where the call to action will happen. But then most likely, and we're currently in a group season now at Crosspoint, Pastor Kevin, our senior leader and communicator, will work groups into his message as well. So somehow there will be a tie into his content where he's talking about, in this past message, he's talking about favor with God and growing spiritually. And then he'll take one of his points will be about groups. And so that's another touch point. We've also realized that for us being multi-site, anything we get Pastor Kevin to kind of get behind in the context of a message just really helps it to set up to win. And so that's just an example of how someone, without being annoying or obnoxious over and over in the same environment, they're going to get 5 to 8 touch points between volunteers, t-shirts, balloons, destinations, announcements, sermon. I mean, they're going to hear it several different ways. And by the time they leave, they're going to think, okay, I know what they wanted me to do today. They wanted me to get into a group.
So this wasn't necessarily what we were talking about, but I want your opinion on this because it's kind of speaks into those touch points with the call to action.
Yeah.
You guys have branded your ministries with those colors.
Yeah.
And it's not like people carry around a sheet that says, hey, groups are green, this is blue, this is red, or whatever. But if they come to Crosspoint, you guys do enough to where they innately put green as groups. And that's like branded into their brain. It's part of the overall branding of the church is that
Right.
people know those colors. And one of my favorite quotes that I've ever heard was from Christopher Chapman, who used to be the innovation director at Disney or something like that. He said that people may not be able to articulate the details, but they notice them.
Right.
And I think that the groups being green and everything going from, because you guys are, your normal color for your logo is a bluish color, and like your interiors kind of follow the same scheme, right?
So yeah, so the blue, we call it Crosspoint blue. That is the color that's used for anything on property, anything guest experience, anything welcome. Like that's our brand. So even our guest experience, our color for that team is going to be that Crosspoint blue. And any signage you see over doors or anything like that is going to have the Crosspoint blue as a part of that. And that's more of like our general brand color that you're going to see on most things that are welcoming guests in. It's kind of a soothing blue, and we use that for just our more general stuff and our guest experience. Yeah.
So that's what people see on a regular everyday basis. So
Right.
when things change to green,
Right.
or things change to whatever the other color might be throughout the year, like you notice. You don't have to like make a big announcement. Hey, we're going green this week. It's no, you pull in the parking lot and now everything is green. It's like, oh, something different's going on. And so that on its own makes people perk up and pay attention. So like you said, you've got, that is your first touch point. Something is new, something's different.
Yeah.
You get out of the car, there's some signage for groups. That's number 2.
Yeah.
They see the t-shirts that the greeters are wearing. That's number 3.
Destination in the lobby might be number 4. There's 4. An actual specific spot where they can go. Yeah.
And then the announcement's 5. Pastor Kevin speaking about it is 6. And then you guys do handouts as well, correct?
We do handouts. Absolutely. So there's a good chance that they may see that in the program. There's a good chance a campus pastor, when they close the service, or stage host will come back at the end and just kind of remind them again on their way out. And that might not be an in-depth thing. Just be like, hey, just remind you on the way out, stop by the kiosk or stop by the group station and sign up today.
So that's 7 to 8 touch points that happen in 70 minutes or so that aren't pushy, aren't annoying, aren't overwhelming, but people get the idea that, hey, we want you to do something.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that we would do that every single week, but I would say on the week that we are launching a campaign, same would be for local good. That's red. Anytime you see red, that represents our global and local good, which most people call missions. That's same thing. So that would happen on the big launch day, or the day we really want to get the most people to sign up. And so, yeah, you can have 6 to 7, clear call to actions, touch points on a Sunday, and we haven't even talked email campaign, social media, web, or any of that stuff yet. So there's a lot of different ways to do it without being pushy.
That's really cool to hear. And just to think through all the different ways you can do things without actually saying, hey, you need to do this.
Yeah.
But I want to switch gears a little bit, because where I went wrong with Nicole was that I didn't ask for the next date.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have asked her to marry me without asking for the next date. And a lot of times in church, our next steps feel super intimidating. We want people to give their life to Jesus, to come join a small group, to get baptized. And these are really important things, but to people who maybe aren't ready yet, they might be overwhelming. And I equate them to the equivalent of asking someone, will you marry me? You don't, like, people aren't ready to get married on the first date, or usually not. So for those people, how do we give a second date equivalent? How do we ask them out again without asking them to marry us right away? What's a half step look like?
Yeah, we'll talk about that pretty consistently in our announcement. So we'll have our call to action, but we will have a transitional call to action as well. And so A lot of times for us, and this probably varies per church or environment or company, whatever, but a lot of times our call to action is very digital. It's very like, hey, you could text this or you could sign up here, you could whatever. We know a lot of people are wired that way. I know I am. I would go through a whole digital process before I would talk to a live person. Um, but I also know there's a lot of people that want to have a conversation first. They want to explore a little bit more. And because we are in the quote unquote business of people, like that's what we're for people. We want to provide an outlet for them to talk to somebody, to have a conversation, have a discussion. A lot of these things we're talking about their spiritual journey. And so it's not so black and white that they can just hit a button. It's not a transaction that way. And so most of the time our transitional call to actions, if they're not ready to hit the join a group button yet, is to have a conversation. And so we try to offer, again, this may just be for our context, but we try to offer in a bigger church, smaller environments for people to have conversations that are in a safe spot for them to explore their faith or explore whatever it is they're asking them to do, to ask more questions. So that'll happen a number of different ways. That could happen in, come down front for prayer. I mean, come down front and talk to a pastor. If you want to explore this further, or if we give a salvation call and they're not ready, it's like if this is something you're thinking about, come down and let's have a conversation. If it's more of an event sign up, it might be stop by a destination in the lobby. There's a volunteer there that would love to know a little bit more about your story and have a conversation with you. So it just helps people give a little bit of the try before you buy stuff in what we're talking about.
I think one of the biggest things we can do for people, and I'm not so sure capital C church-wise, we do a great job at this, but giving people a place to safely ask questions. And that'll look different in different contexts. Like you said, you guys have a lot of digital text capabilities. You're in Nashville. You're a younger church. In other contexts, it may be a class that you set up that's on baptism that teaches why we get baptized. What's the idea behind baptism, so people can come and ask questions.
And we see that even on our online. We have, like most churches, if they broadcast online, they have online chat, but we also have a place for people to go if they want to talk directly to that host or something. And so I think creating other environments for people to have a conversation with a real person, even if it's in an online chat, but there's someone they're able to ask some questions to and explore some of their concerns, is really important, because I think we can fall in love in the church with really fast, quick assimilation. That's easy. But people's lives and stories are just messy, and you've got to be able to wade out into it. And so as much as I'd love someone just to jump on their phone and sign up for whatever immediately, the truth of the matter is most of the time we need to be willing, and not just willing, but excited to engage people on a personal level and hear their unique story and what they're going through and how we can help them.
Here's an example that I'd love you to help me think that I literally just thought of. In the church, for our first-time guests, we always say, or most people say, hey, if you're a first-time guest, we're so glad you're here. We have an info form in our handout, our bulletin, that we'd love for you to fill out and drop it off at this place, and we'll give you a free gift.
Yeah.
That feels like it's not a big step, but if it's your very first time, that's a will you marry me question.
Interesting. Yeah.
We within the past year started going to a new church, and I don't think we did the new person form until we've been going there like a month.
Yeah.
Because we didn't want to get added to a list or commit to something before we knew that we were going to stay there.
Right.
So how can we make that new person, and I'm putting you on the spot because I'm literally just thinking through this at the same time. How do we make that new person assimilation more comfortable, more, hey, will you go on another date with me instead of will you marry me?
Yeah. So that is great. And we're exploring all those things even right now, because what you said is exactly true. What we're finding is there's a lot of people that will come to a church for months before they're willing to flag themselves to say that I'm here. And I think we can get a little bit into some personality types, but there's some people that don't want to be recognized. They want to fly under the radar, sometimes for a while, before you reach out, before they are ready to engage. So if it's a first-time guest, sometimes those first-timers are not, like you said, they don't want to go talk to someone at info station. So one thing that we've done is we've started even just adjusting and tweaking our language. We still have an event called Connect, where people can come learn more about the life of the church and help find their place, find their purpose in the life of the church. But we do it almost as a safety net, because a lot of people aren't attending classes anymore, but we just have it there. So one thing about Connected we found is we don't actually go after the new person necessarily for that event. And even when we're working our assimilation process, even our language, we talk about if you're new or newer to Crosspoint. And sometimes we'll even say, maybe you've been coming here for a few months, you've attended for a few months, but you're ready to say, you know what, I'm ready to kind of go to the next step. I let them know that our assimilation process is for them too. And so we've had everyone, even last Sunday, there was a story of someone that came at the first service and they started serving in guest experience at the second service. There are those people, they're just ready. They want to jump in. They've been looking, especially, and again, this is a whole nother conversation, but everyone looks online before they show up, not just in church, but in everything. And so for that matter, people have been stalking us for a long time before they come to our church. I talked to a lady last Sunday. She's been watching online for 3 years, and then she just showed up last Sunday. So wow. Chances are she's been watching us from distance for a while. She may assimilate quicker because the courage for her to show up. She told me, she's like, I feel like I know you, Pastor Kevin and Chris. I know you're meeting me for the first time. So she's already educated about the church and she's ready. And so that also changes our assimilation because people are coming for the first time, but they've been watching for a long time online. We've got to be aware of that. But it's still just saying, hey, at your pace, you can. And I think if we target our language to a first-time guest, we rule out the person that's been sitting there for 9 months that hasn't flagged themselves yet because they're just trying to figure out, are these people, are they weirdos? Are they who they say they are? What are they really about? Do I like this preacher? They're trying to figure out all the things you try to figure out when you see if a church is a good fit. And so we have to adjust our language accordingly.
If we say first-time guests fill this out, then we do cut people out of that. We kind of put ourselves on a hold. But if we say, what was your line? If you're new or newer to us, is that what you got to say?
Something like that, or hey, maybe we just call it out. Maybe you've been attending Crosspoint for the past few months and trying to decide if you're going to make this your church home, and you're ready to take a next step and get plugged in. We use find your place and find your purpose a lot because we feel like everyone is looking for a purpose and community. And so we're saying, hey, if you've been checking us out for a while, but you're ready to find your place, find your purpose, and take the next step, then this is for you as well, or whatever we're announcing. So we just try to expand our language to recognize that this may be your first time, or you just haven't connected yet and you've been here for a while. Then this event is for you.
That's really good. And that's a great place for us to stop today. So Drew, I appreciate you again. Thanks for being here. And we look forward to talking to you next time.
Yeah, man. Always a pleasure. Thank you.